All right, thank you everyone for being here tonight. Just want to give a little introduction and talk a little bit about what LMPD has done over the last few years to give you some perspective. So obviously I've been chief for a couple days now. No, about 3 months, but you know, I grew up here, I'm born and raised here, I've been on this department for 18 years. So not only have I seen this city from the perspective of a young man growing up on the streets of Louisville, but I know this city from the perspective of a police officer who has worked in several neighborhoods in the city of Louisville, from Newburgh, Preston Highway, spent 8 years in the Russell neighborhood and Beecher Terrace, and done a little bit of everything along the way. But what I saw along the way was a need to learn from everything that we do. I think a lot of times what happens is we go through our day-to-day and we just get to the next day and we end up wherever we are. And what we need to do as an agency is we need to make sure that we learn from all of our experiences and our interactions. And so in my position, you know, really in my position since I've been in the chief's office, not just in the chief's seat, it really has been about how do we take those experiences and make sure that we are changing the department for the better. Embrace change. Change is constant, and the world is changing around us, and if we don't push for change, if we don't become comfortable with change, then we're going to get left behind. And as the agency that is sworn to protect and serve this community, we have to be agents of change as well. And so some of that starts internally. So when we talk about police reform is not something new. There have been times when the police have been on the leading edge in certain issues, and there have been times when police are on the trailing edge of certain issues. And so we are very comfortable with change and getting there. And so just to give you some perspective over the past few years, we have made drastic changes within the police department, both structurally and culturally, primarily with the creation of the Accountability and Improvement Bureau. So with that, we created a whole new arm of the department that we moved training over into. We created something about 30 new positions within LMPD, both sworn and civilian. And all of those are about performance improvement for officers. How do we make sure that officers are the best that they can be, understand how to do this job to the best of their ability, understand how to read and react to the room. As part of that, we also added 5 new legal advisors. Whereas we had 1 lawyer that was embedded in LMPD before, we now have 5, one of whom, well, now 2 of whom are assigned to our training division to make sure that our training meets the legal standards that we need it to. We've increased our training staff as well as having an academic unit within our training unit that makes sure that our training quality and our training curriculum, how's it going, brother? Sorry, just recognizing for a second. So making sure that our training quality and our training curriculum is where it needs to be. And so also creating a feedback system. So how do we evaluate the performance of officers, get that information back to supervisors in a way that they can utilize that to make sure that officers are performing at their highest. The other thing that we did that I think is extremely important is I needed to front load officer and employee wellness. These officers and professional staff are exposing themselves to the worst parts of people's lives, and they need to be taken care of. We need to make sure that they are happy and healthy when they go out there and interact with people. Anyone who is having a bad day for whatever reason, we treat others worse. If you don't get your coffee on time, you're probably going to be a little bit grumpy when you're dealing with somebody. So think about the things that officers do, both physically, the demands of the job, as well as the emotional demands of the job, and they're going to carry that over into their interactions with people. So officer and employee wellness is part and parcel of police reform, quote unquote, because it affects the way that we interact with people. And I'll just give you a quick statistic. Our number of days off after opening our wellness center from workers' comp injuries went down by almost 2,000. And that is officers out on the street. So when we're talking about we have an officer shortage of 250, can you imagine if we had another 1,500 or 2,000 days off from work-related injuries by officers? That is an absolutely amazing statistic. That means that those people are out there providing you service on a day-to-day basis where otherwise they wouldn't have been, because we invested in their physical and mental health. So very excited to be able to answer your questions and talk about all of the things that we're doing in LMPD. I see some of our media colleagues are here who I'm sure will have plenty of questions and insights, but I take the approach that I'm very, very open to answering questions. If it's something I can't answer, I'll tell you I can't answer that, or I don't know the answer to it. Otherwise, I get very excited about being able to talk about what we do and why we do it. We have some really amazing people that work at LMPD, and I get excited about talking about the things that they do. So looking forward to having this discussion with you.
Thanks, Chief. Good evening, everyone. My name's David Kaplan. I appreciate everyone being here tonight. I know there's plenty of other things you could be doing, so thanks for being engaged citizens, because we need your feedback. As our facilitator mentioned, I'm the mayor's chief of staff. Like him, I've been in Metro Hall now since January of 2023, so it's been a pretty steep learning curve for all of us coming in as the new administration into a fairly challenging situation with respect to both public safety and the urgent need to make sure that we do policing well and do it in a constitutional way that respects everyone's individual rights, but does not sacrifice public safety either. I can say with respect to the mayor that he's an impatient guy. I mean, he likes to get things done, and he didn't wait to take action with respect to some of the legacy of the history of policing report that I know you all have read that still exists today. I mean, we all know that things have improved with respect to policing and the protection of constitutional rights, particularly for minority groups and marginalized groups over the past 250 years. There have been improvements, but as the Department of Justice report showed us quite clearly by looking at the years between 2016 and 2021, there's still a huge amount of work to be done, and my colleague here can get into a little bit more about what the Department of Justice told us about how our police department's operating. But like I said, the mayor was impatient and wanted to take action. So even before the Department of Justice completed its investigation, and it was in the closing stages when we took office, we proceeded to extend an olive branch to the Office of Inspector General, which was created as part of the Civilian Review and Accountability Board that came in during now Deputy Mayor James's tenure as president of the council. And what that did was establish real accountability through a citizen-appointed board that can do its own investigations and to provide some additional oversight and accountability with respect to the police department. As many of you may have met the Inspector General, his name is Ed Harness. One of the issues that had been troubling to him and that he brought to us when we took office was that he had not been able to negotiate an agreement with the police department to make sure that he could get all of the documents and information that he needed. Within the first 6 weeks of the administration, we had completed an agreement with the Inspector General to make sure that he gets body cam footage whenever he needs it to do his own independent review of police-citizen interactions, and to also ensure that officers, as a condition of their employment, being police officers, have to appear for interviews just as they would during a professional standards unit investigation, while certainly protecting all of their rights that they have under the Peace Officers Bill of Rights, which is also very important. So that was a very early thing. We didn't wait for the Department of Justice to tell us to do that. We proceeded with that. And the chief mentioned officer wellness. I mean, it goes without saying that hurt people are more likely to hurt people. And so one of the things that we knew the Department of Justice was concerned about is whether we are taking care of officers' mental, physical, spiritual wellness, or because we know that if we don't do that, there's more likely to be incidents that should not happen. And so we took immediate action as well to get that wellness center up and running. There was already a wellness unit, but now it has a place where it can be, and it's also a place where the community can now interact with the police in a very positive environment. So in March of 2023, the Department of Justice came out with its findings, and the media has often referred to it as a scathing report, but however you want to characterize it, it made findings of things that they felt needed to be fixed. And so one of the important things that I just think is worth remembering is that our mayor made a decision to take the stage with Attorney General Merrick Garland, who was down with DC with his top people, Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark, Deputy Attorney General, I'm blanking now.
It's the Associate Attorney General
Vanita Gupta was here, Associate Attorney General. Thank you, Megan. So in front of the community, standing side by side with the Department of Justice, the mayor said, I am sorry for the incidents that are detailed in this report and the things that the Department of Justice found a pattern or practice of that they felt produced constitutional violations. And the mayor did not resist that findings report. He did not say, take us to court, prove your case. He said, I'm gonna take this report, I'm gonna embrace it and challenge the department to become the best police department in the country. And that still remains the goal. And it's obviously it's a moonshot goal, it's a tough goal, but that's the type of goal you have to set to deal with these types of situations. And so I believe that was the first time a mayor had apologized to the community for the types of things that were identified in the DOJ findings report, but that was the commitment. And the other commitment was not just words, it was, we're going to reach an agreement with the Department of Justice. It's called an agreement in principle. We signed it immediately, which says that we're gonna negotiate a list of things that the police department has to do well with regarding to policy, training, accountability, with an independent third-party monitor that the general public will help pick. There'll be community input into that. He agreed to that immediately. Now, we are still, and my colleague Megan can get into this more, we are in the final stages, we believe, of negotiations with the Department of Justice. It took them, I think, 11 months. Is that right? 11 and a half months to get us a draft. So we've not been nearly that many months negotiating this. We've tried to approach it urgently, but it has to be done right. It has to mesh with the things that now Chief Humphrey set up during this investigation so we could hit the ground running, make sure everything meshes together, the systems, and so that the data can be collected and reviewed, and the police department can be held accountable for its improvements. So I also, before handing the mic to Megan, I want to emphasize that this administration and this mayor understands that we cannot police our way out of 250 years of, accumulated misconduct and just the legacy that we inherit. But we also know that we cannot take another 250 years to get out of this mess. So policing is an important component of this initiative, obviously, and there are immediate law enforcement needs every day. When people call the police, they expect the police to come and address that situation. And the entire community demands that. We gotta have that. At the same time, that alone will not deal with the issues in the community with respect to crime that afflict all parts of the community, but unfortunately are concentrated in certain areas. The mayor understands that there are root causes for crime in this community: lack of educational opportunities, lack of economic opportunities, and just investment that has not been distributed evenly over the community. And so without getting into too much detail now, and I'm happy to answer other questions, just by way of example, our last budget had $15 million in it for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We've made historic investments in parks and libraries with some of the federal funds that remain, and also general fund dollars, but we've got some American Rescue Plan dollars left. I've invested those in parks and libraries. Parkland will be seeing its new library. The Portland neighborhood will be seeing its new library. The beautiful Alberta O. Jones Park, right in this vicinity. It's Wi-Fi connected. It will stand up to any other park in this community, and it's named after the, as many of you know, the first black woman to become a member of the Kentucky Bar, who was a prosecutor who was tragically killed. But before that occurred, she was a civil rights activist and made huge contributions there, as well as, I think, negotiating Muhammad Ali's first contract. Now, she passed away in 1965. Now we've got a park that's not just a monument, but it's a true investment in the community in her name. The Thrive by 5 early childhood education initiative is very important. The goal is to get all in 3- and 4-year-olds with quality early childhood education, free or affordable for everybody, and we know that could be a game changer. The mayor didn't wait for federal dollars to just pop into existence. I mean, he has set up an entirely new initiative. There's now a separate 501c3 that can raise money, and $5 million was put into that in the last general fund budget to get the ball rolling for this other moonshot initiative, which is to get to that point where all 3- and 4-year-olds in this community get quality early childhood education. We've also made investments in something called the Community Care Campus. I know there's the History of Policing report talks about it. What do we do about mental health care? What do we do about social services? A city can only do so much. The federal and state have to play a huge role in that. But an example of what we've been able to do here locally is to launch this Community Care Campus, which is kind of in the Smoketown vicinity. It's a lot of acres of property that will be developed into a quality family shelter, permanent supportive housing, and other services that are very important to treat some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear that the administration understands these investments must be made, while at the same time understanding that we have to have day-to-day public safety, and the police have to have the tools that they need to make sure that the community can be safe. So with that, I'll hand it to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Megan Metcalf. I'm Mayor Greenberg's Deputy General Counsel. I'd like to thank whoever made these name cards because they gave me a promotion, and I will be submitting it to my boss after this, so thank you. I've been working on the mayor's team since he took office in January of 2023. So when the DOJ financial report dropped, it was obviously something that we had to take over, and how we would address those issues. If anyone hasn't read the report, just to give you a basic overview, the Department of Justice opened an investigation under their federal authority from the Safer Streets Act. They conducted an investigation over the course of over 2 years, spanning from 2016 to the days of 2021. They found reasonable cause to believe that we violated the law and the Constitution in 7 ways, including in allowing people to protest police action, in discriminatory practices in street enforcement, and fair and impartial enforcement of our laws. They found reasonable cause to believe that we violated the Americans with Disabilities Act in affording policing and emergency services to people with behavioral health emergencies. They also found issues with our search warrant applications and executions. In addition to the 7 findings, they also raised serious concerns about how we investigate sexual assault and domestic violence cases. So if you look at that findings report, it kind of gives you an overview about what the Department of Justice is seeking to address in any consent decree that we enter into. They also had a series of recommendations at the back of that findings report. There were 35 different recommendations that kind of give you a roadmap to what they view as systemic change. We would not be the first city that enters into a consent decree. There's a number across the nation that still have them, and they can kind of give you an idea about what it's like to engage in this kind of systemic reform. Currently, we are consulting with other cities like New Orleans, Baltimore, Cleveland, past cities that have actually entered the consent decree process and have been able to reform their law enforcement agencies in a way that makes their community proud, like Detroit. And so really what we're working on is, while we look at the harms that the DOJ has highlighted, we are looking to create systemic changes that will prevent further harms, that will detect them quickly if it happens, and that will correct them in our workforce before they become larger issues. So those are really the hallmarks of what the consent decree process is seeking to do. And through that, it's a court order that will be overseen by a federal judge. The federal judge will receive reports regularly from that independent monitor that is appointed with community input. And as you can see from across the nation, this allows the community to have a voice in how reform is happening, to hear from the department as it's making these changes, and really to understand what the process is like behind the scenes. I'll pass on to Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. My name is David James, and I serve currently as Deputy Mayor of Emergency Services for Mayor Greenberg. And prior to that, I was on the City Council. I served 5 years as the council president. I was on the council for 13 years. But even prior to that, I served as a police officer on the Louisville Metro Police Department. So I have a big spectrum of how I view all of these things that have taken place. I can remember when I joined the police department was under a consent decree at that time related to hiring practices of the police department as it related to African Americans. And when I joined the police department, I can't say that it was the best of times at that particular juncture, but I can say that things have significantly changed for the better. And I can say that out of those 30-plus years, over the last 2-3 years for the police department, the amount of change that's taken place in that amount of time dwarfs any change that took place the entire time I was on the police department. And one of the things that, as we talk about the DOJ report, I want to remind everybody of, as my colleague Megan was talking about the areas that the DOJ spoke about, is that it didn't say the entire police department was bad, which is something I often hear. In fact, it said the majority of the police department does the right thing every day with the right intentions. But there were some things systemically that were not functioning well, and there are some people that did some things they shouldn't do. And so I want us to think about that. As a African American that grew up in the West End, I can tell you that I've had bad experiences with different members of the police department. But I can also tell you I had great experiences with members of the police department. And so as we go through this conversation tonight, I just want to say thank you for being here. I look forward to the conversation, look forward to the questions, and I hope we have good dialogue tonight. Thank you.
People walked in during the panel, so I just want to revisit some of the things that I said early. First, I'm Cherie Dawson-Edwards. I'm a professor at the University of Louisville in criminal justice, and I declined to say that I also direct our social change program, which some people don't think really match together, but I make them match. So with that said, the way that we're doing this portion of the event is through the note cards that we have provided for you all. If you have questions for the panelists, then please write them on the note card, and Vanessa and her team will collect them and bring them up to me. If we are not able to get to every question, we strongly encourage you to write your name and your email on the back of the card so that there can be some follow-up with you on your particular question. So I will try to get through as many questions as possible. I also, just as a point of privilege as the facilitator right now, want to acknowledge the authors of the report. We do have an author present. I won't call her out, but she's my colleague. And I just want to acknowledge their work as well. And for those of you who didn't hear this earlier, we did provide a brief summary of the entire report, as well as a QR code that links to the entire report so that you have access to that now and in the future. So, are we ready? Okay. The first question is, how does the leadership of LMPD hold officers accountable when the culture of the department encourages aggressive policing?
So accountability is a funny thing, and I think it's one of those words, accountability, de-escalation, professionalism. We have to, at a certain point, stipulate what we mean by accountability, and we need to be on the same page about what accountability is. Accountability is not discipline. Accountability is a form of love that prevents discipline, right? If you do accountability the right way, you don't get to the point where discipline becomes the answer, right? So accountability is about making sure that everyone performs to the level that they should perform at. And part of that is about having tough conversations with each other on a regular basis. So when you create a culture where the norm becomes, hey, you messed up, this is how you messed up, and this is how I'm going to help you get better, then when it really is a problem, that conversation is less difficult to have. And so that is the cultural part of that, is becoming very, very comfortable with the concept of we are all responsible for each other's improvement, right? The other side of that is the technical side of it, the disciplinary side of it. And so we do have the process, the disciplinary process that comes through, whether it's a complaint or chief initiated, that cases are investigated, and ultimately the results of those cases come up to the entire command staff. the executive staff with the legal staff review those cases thoroughly and make a recommendation to me, the chief, who then makes a final disciplinary decision.
Okay, so I also want to just say that I'm going to prioritize the questions that relate to the report and the DOJ, what the panelists have said. I know that there are other questions, but since the purpose of this was to talk about the response to the report and acknowledge some of the things that have done, I'm going to do a little prior. That's also the professor in me to try to have some order. So the next question says, how has training on de-escalation, anti-racism, and community engagement evolved over the years? How do you assess its effectiveness in reducing violence?
Okay, so our training has evolved greatly over the years, and this is something where we've had input from external stakeholders and other parties. And actually, you can look at some of the de-escalation training that we've done in particular. De-escalation, like I said, is another one of those terms that we need to come to an understanding and an agreement of what that means. De-escalation is not something that I can give you. It's not something I can do to you. It's not something I can put on you. De-escalation is a desired outcome, right? So I'll use tactics, techniques, communication in order to get a de-escalated outcome. But I can't just walk up to a person and say, de-escalate. That's not the way this works, right? It's a two-party agreement, right? I'm doing certain things so that my behavior does not escalate the situation and add to the tension. So what are the tools, tactics, and techniques I can use to take some of that tension, some of that air out of the balloon and make this situation safer for all of us, right? So one of the big things that we did was this ICAT training, integrating communications tactics and assessment and tactics. And there's a study, it's from 2019, there's a study that came out on it that showed that we reduced our use of force, our officer injuries, and our suspect injuries by almost 25% in all three of those categories. That is empirical evidence that our de-escalation training has worked greatly. And that's in the circumstances of an academic study, not something that was done by LMPD. It's based on numbers that they came up with, not us. The other thing is understanding decision-making. Decision-making is a skill that honestly I don't think we ever taught until the last 5 years. We taught skills, right, physical skills, and we taught knowledge. What is the law? And we never really spent too much time on how do you make decisions? How do you take in information, process that information through a decision-making model so that you have an output that is most likely the best decision possible? And then the important part of that is, on the back end, when you get the result of that, how do you evaluate whether or not that's effective in real time? So what action I took, is it effective so that I can recognize very quickly that I need to change tactics in my approach if it's not effective? Because you've all seen the videos of an officer just yelling at somebody over and over again, get on the ground, and the person's on the ground, right? That is about training the ability to recognize changes in the circumstance, right? And sometimes we have to change how we train based on the outcomes that we're seeing, right?
Thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in? I just didn't want to move on without giving you all a chance. Okay, so this next question actually encompasses a couple of the cards. So I will ask it, and I think you will get your answer even if you worded it a different way. Yeah. Okay. And it references the bottom part of the summary page where there's key recommendations from the report. And so I don't know if you all have that in front of you, but there's some copies behind you. But it says, for recommendations 2 and 3, what are the timetables for implementation? What qualifies as satisfactory levels of compliance? And just for the purposes of me being an educator, recommendation number 2 is residential requirements for officers, and recommendation number 3 is structural reform and investment in social services. So there was a corollary question, not by the same person because I can tell by handwriting, but it's talking about the number of police officers, is that necessary versus increasing the number of social workers that might deal with the social issues that are in our community?
So I'll start, and I think then Deputy Mayor James might be better to end this set of questions. I think when it comes to community safety, we have to stop looking at an either-or approach, and it's a yes-and approach. We are over 250 to 300 police officers short. In my opinion, we're probably closer to 500 police officers short. You can see a direct correlation between officer activity and safety in the community. When officers reduce their amount of activity and interaction, and I don't just mean enforcement activity, I mean just activity where they are visible and interacting with the community, violent crime goes up and people die. That's plain and simple. It's pretty clear. The other thing is that there are things that we are not subject matter experts in. We are not social workers, right? If we wanted to be social workers, that's what we would have done. I did that for almost a year before coming onto this job. We have a specific skill set. And yes, we are going to be involved with people with mental health crises because some of their behaviors present clear and present dangers to the public. That being said, we have developed a deflection model that I think Deputy Mayor James can speak on more in depth. But this is what I will tell you about dealing with people in mental health crisis. This is not a Louisville problem. This is not a Kentucky problem. This is a national problem where the federal government has let us down with the deinstitutionalization of being able to handle people in mental health crisis. I am not about taking people's freedoms away. What I'm about is giving people the support that they deserve in order to live the life that they can. And frankly, the conditions that we allow people in mental health crises to live in on a day-to-day basis, we would not allow a dog to live in. Yet we do it under some auspice that it would be wrong to institutionalize a person, and that's just wrong. It's not the way that we should treat people.
Thank you. I'd just like to add on to what the chief just said. I think the question about the social worker part, so we have a program, it's run out of MetroSafe 911. When a person is in crisis, you can call, and the dispatcher will determine whether we could send a police officer to that or whether or not we need to send a mental health specialist to that particular situation. And we currently do that. And we've sent thousands and thousands of runs of social workers and mental health specialists to different locations throughout our city to help people that are in crisis, mental health crisis. The other part of that question, I think, was related to having police officers live within the area that they live. So there is an incentive program that was passed by the Metro Council and signed by the mayor to incentivize officers to live in certain census tracts. However, the reality of making them do that can't be done because there's a state law that prevents that. And so police officers can live wherever they choose to live. And if they choose to live in one of those census tracts, they will. But short of that, there's a law that prevents that from happening.
Good. Okay.
I just wanted to add one other thing, which was, one of the sort of the concepts presented by recommendation 3 is sort of an idea that there's a trade-off between spending on public safety versus social services and other types of community investments. And I think, as the chief suggested, that is a false choice. Now, the police department is a big part of the city budget. That's a reality. I can tell you, being in my chair since January of 2023, and I think I can speak for the mayor by saying that the community has spoken loud and clear that they expect gun violence to be addressed. They expect for all forms of violent crime to be addressed. They expect property crime to be addressed. They expect the police to show up when they're called and to show up promptly. And because of the circumstances the chief described, I mean, the force is spread more thin than it used to be, and that does have impacts, and it makes it more difficult for the chief to fulfill those expectations that the public has for the police department. We are not hearing from the community broadly that substantial resources should at this time be shifted out of the police department. What we are hearing is that there needs to be investment in parts of the community that were traditionally underinvested, that the commitment to providing amenities in all across the county, but including, as I stated at the beginning, the Parkland Library, the Portland Library, the pool at Algonquin Park is another example of providing infrastructure in parts of the community that have been waiting for that investment. And I would include the parts all across the county that have been deserving these kinds of investments. But we believe that for the big picture of crime reduction, those things are important. Community building, getting people out interacting with each other in parks and at libraries and in community centers, that's critically important. and investing in things like early childhood education, like the mayor's made a commitment to do. Critically important, because in 18 years, those 3- and 4-year-olds, they're gonna be more educated, have more opportunities, be better citizens, more likely to vote, and all the things that come from being in a nurturing educational environment. So we hope that the community can get behind us, not to create a trade-off or a false choice between public safety and spending on things that in the long run will also enhance public safety.
So the next question is related, and it's a little bit different, so I wanted to just add on to the question about the structural reforms and investment in social services, and it's also related to the officer shortage kind of piece. It says, has a study or assessment been done that validates the issue of an officer shortage? Do we really need more officers, and who is recommending this? So you answered that yes, we do, but can you expand on why we need this and what's the evidence?
So I'm actually glad whoever asked this asked it, because I think we need an actual outside independent agency to come in and say, how many officers do we need, where do we need them, and what do our geographic boundaries of the police divisions need to be? We have not changed those numbers since merger, and so right now, actually, Assistant Chief Corey Robinson is heading up that project to seek. He's putting out an RFP, a request for proposals, on someone to actually come in and do a study on that. And I can tell you anecdotally, it's going to say we need more officers. It's pretty obvious. If you compare us and our population to other cities, they have far more officers than us. So when you look at some of those places, they're at 1,800 to 2,500 officers, not the 1,265 that we had in 2019, 2020, right? So we definitely know that 1,000 is not cutting it, because we're also at 150 plus homicides every year since then. So there is a direct correlation between the number of officers that we have and violent crime.
Thank you. So I'm going to shift a little bit to civilian oversight. So there's two questions related to that. I'll see if I can combine them, or I'll just follow up with one. This says, this community and the report calls for greater civilian oversight and more direct oversight of LMPD. When will that happen in a meaningful way?
I guess that this is my time to shine.
I didn't want to leave you out.
I know. So I don't really want to get into all the details of what we're negotiating, but I think that it's easy to look at our comparator cities in Baltimore and New Orleans, that there are significant aspects of community input and oversight in any consent decree. It's one of the hallmarks that the Department of Justice wants to see. And it happens in different ways in those cities, but they have robust civilian oversight and review board type organizations. They have robust community engagement with the monitor. The monitor is conducting, the independent monitor is conducting community outreach, getting input from the community about what their experiences have been with law enforcement. There are opportunities for the community to participate in the actual court process sometimes, either providing comments to the federal judge or in other ways. Always here to serve.
Well, just while we're making that break, thank you, Chief, for helping out. If anybody else, can you double check your phones? I just double checked mine to make sure that they're silent, since there's recordings and media here. So thank you. Go ahead.
So yeah, the conclusion of that is just expect to see that there will be a lot of opportunities for civilians to have input into how our law enforcement agencies are operating, and also to provide that input to the court as well.
So, and just quickly, I'll say I'm actually a fan of civilian oversight. I think the vast majority of the time, we do the right thing. And to have a third party, someone external, be able to confirm that, I think that's a great thing. The other thing is about perspective. Obviously, we do our job from a certain perspective, and it is good to have outside perspectives that look in and say, did you think about this? How about you doing it this way? And there's no harm in that. If somebody says I'm wrong, that's a bonus, right? Because what it is, it's an opportunity for me to improve. if nobody ever tells me that I'm wrong, then I just keep doing the same dumb thing over and over again until you call me an idiot. So I would prefer you get me on the front end and say, hey, fix this, as opposed to getting me on the back end and saying, look how bad he is.
Thank you. So this question relates to the consent decree and DOJ report. It says, how will the consent decree recommendations be implemented which seem in direct opposition to the new police contract?
Yeah, so there's nothing in the police contract, if you actually familiarize yourself with it, that is in opposition to anything in the consent decree. You can ask any of the lawyers sitting up here, you can ask anybody with the Department of Justice. What we are going to do is we are going to implement the requirements of the consent decree. We've already actually implemented a lot of things that are police reform related that I would love to be able to go in detail about with our audit unit, our performance review board, and our wellness center, and all these other things that we're doing, and as far as how we've changed our training and things like that. But there's nothing in the police contract that prevents discipline. There's nothing that prevents us from being able to take action against officers. I think sometimes we get a little bit confused, and this goes back to the conversation about accountability versus discipline. We think that the only way that you should treat officers when they mess up is fire them. Well, here's the thing: is if you're constantly getting rid of the bottom 10%, you're going to be looking at yourself in the mirror real fast. And so what you need to do is you need to invest in officers, show them that you care about them, show that they are meaningful to the safety of the community, get their buy-in, and treat them like the valued employees that they are. And everybody wants to do a good job for the most part when it comes down to it, and get rid of those who don't.
All right, thank you. So just to shift gears a little bit, these two questions are related to restorative justice. So the recommendation number 4 is about restorative justice and compensation. The report advocates for a process of amends, including monetary compensation for victims of police abuse in their communities, particularly those who have suffered intergenerational harm. So the first question is, what does that look like, or what could that look like? Or maybe if that's not what we're doing now, like you gave examples of other places that are doing, what does that even look like?
Well, one observation I would make is that the legal system is available to people who have suffered injury at the hands of the police. It's available. There are plenty of lawyers willing to take those cases, and it has worked for many of those people who've recovered, whether it's a wrongful conviction case or a use of force case. And in fact, it's been pointed out to us that one of the reasons that we need to have police reform, other than it's the right thing to do because the police should not be violating people's rights or using excessive force. Another reason is it is costly for the city, but the reason that it's costly and the reason that millions of dollars have been paid out on a regular basis to folks who did have their rights violated, that's something that we've had to contend with for quite some time. But it is evidence that people who have been harmed do have recourse. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I just wanted to talk about restorative justice a little bit. Now, here in Louisville, the only restorative justice program that we have is for individuals who are perpetrators of crime. But I think that what this recommendation is getting to the heart of is for people who have suffered harms from law enforcement itself. And in other communities, it might look like something like a community mediation program. So rather than a traditional disciplinary process where there's an investigation and the way that the officer is disciplined is through suspension or termination, for harms that are less severe than the fact that we don't want them to be on the force anymore, but things that really discipline, like a suspension, isn't going to help the person who is harmed. There are community mediation programs that would allow them to bring the officer, community member together and to have a dialogue and to address that harm directly. So that's one way that it can work.
The next question, does anybody else have anything? Okay. The next question is, how will you do community policing?
So again, community policing is one of those terms that we need to figure out how to agree upon what it means, because it means something different to everyone. If you think that we should go back to the days of where there's an officer on walking patrol on your beat, just get rid of that. It's never going to happen again. We went to a 911 policing model in the 80s, and if you want to be able to pick up the phone and call 911 and have a cop show up, then we need about 3,000 cops if you want somebody walking your beat also. So get rid of that. Does that mean that we shouldn't do that when we can and when we have things available? Yes. And if you, our crime plan that I've spoken about builds that in. So where are those opportunities where we can create meaningful interactions between officers and the public? This is fine. I enjoy these types of interactions, but really community policing means, do you know the officers that ride your beat, right? Do you trust the officer that rides your beat is gonna take care of you? And that's what community policing comes down to. And so are we going to be able to create meaningful, non-confrontational interactions where you get to know each other? And that's what it's about, is can an officer come up, knock on your door, and have a conversation with you about what's going on in your community when there's nothing actually wrong at that moment? That they didn't get a call, but they came to you and said, hey, what's going on in your community? How can I help? This is the beat that I ride. And so yes, that part of community policing, in addition to these structured parts of community policing, are part and parcel to our crime plan, so that we make sure that officers understand how impactful and how important that is as well.
Thank you. And a related question, someone asked, what does LMPD need from the community?
From the community is we need us to, we've become too comfortable with the level of violence in this community. Plain and simple. We've become far too comfortable with it. Nobody wants police abuses. Nobody wants, quote unquote, over-policing or overstepping by police. But when we have over 170 homicides and 70% of those are black people, we've missed the mark, right? The pendulum has swung too far, and we need the cooperation of the community in solving and preventing violent crimes. When you see something that doesn't look right, say something. Speak up. Right now we're having a debate about a mask ordinance. That mask ordinance means nothing one way or the other. It was a conversation between me and the mayor about are there other tools that we can use in order to prevent and stop violence? It's a single thing. And I'm glad that the community is very interested in it. But overall, here's what's going to happen, is that we are going to look for new ideas, both enforcement and community-related ideas, in order to stop and prevent violent crime. Are we gonna get it right all the time? Nope. Sometimes it's just not gonna work. Sometimes we're gonna step over the line. But what we're not going to do is accept the status quo of 150 to 170 people being murdered on our streets. It's not acceptable, right? So what we need from the community is be participatory in that process. I get that there is a history that cannot be undone with the snap of a finger, that builds trust and makes you feel like that officers are gonna do their job right and do it well. I am asking you to be part of that system though. Don't just step out and remove yourself from the system because you don't like us, right? Still insert yourself in that system because it's our neighborhoods that are suffering this violence. And fact of the matter is that white cop, black cop, gay cop, straight cop are the ones that's gonna show up and patch up that little black boy that just got shot, right? I can guarantee you, I've seen more young black kids get shot and killed than any of you in this room. And it's nothing that I'll ever forget, right? And I need the community to help us in that process, right? Because the last thing that I want to do is to show up to that again.
Thank you. There's a follow. I know we only have a few more minutes for questions, but I'm glad you brought up the mask ordinance, and thank you for sharing your perspectives on that. But I think you know that people are concerned about if the mask ordinance will be equitably enforced. Can you speak to those concerns that the community might have?
Absolutely, and I think that's a very valid concern. Any type of discretionary tool that the police has available to them is subject to the risk for abuse. We know that, right? And that's not a harm to acknowledge that. And that's part of the conversation that we need to, the way that we need to start having the conversation around race, is that we just know that certain things are what they are, right? It's not a value statement. There is a risk in anything that we do and that changes our strategies that it's misused or misemployed. Yes, and we have to be very aware of that. That is why we are teaching officers, and officers are having an understanding of how to use certain tools that are available to them to keep people safe and do it the right way. We haven't always had that level of emphasis on the impact that officers have on a larger scale, right? I know it's easy for us to sit in an academic setting, or it's easy for us to sit in our living rooms and say, look at this big picture. Look at the effect that years and years and years of this activity by police has had on black communities. I can tell you as a beat officer, what I'm looking at is the person that I see that's behaving suspiciously, and I stop and get them in a foot chase and get a gun off of them. That's what I see. I'm not seeing that big picture effect, right? What I'm seeing is the person that I've stopped 10, 15, 20 times and said, get out of this lifestyle, and then all of a sudden I'm going to the scene where they've been shot and killed. I'm not seeing that big picture effect of what mass incarceration does to black communities, right? Because I'm seeing the problem that's in front of my face. And so we do need to have a better conversation within the police department, right, about what those effects are cumulatively on the communities that we work in. But we also have to understand that we do have to encourage officers to go out there and police and make stops and get bad actors off the street. That both go hand in hand.
Just a quick thing about the mask ordinance, and hopefully that can, after receiving more community input, can be unveiled at some point. But my colleague Shannon Kemper's in the back of the room. So Shannon, I'm gonna take a page. I learned something from her today. So she's the new senior advisor to the mayor on law and public policy. So that original mask ordinance that goes back to 1983, it was enacted because the KKK was marching down the street in parades wearing hoods with masks. And so that ordinance came from a good place. It was to find a way to address that, let people march, but basically try to, unmask them, because those masks are designed to create terror and to conceal, people didn't want to be identified as members. So that's how that came to be. That mask ordinance has carried on to the present. We're in a new world now. We had COVID. A lot of people need to wear masks for health reasons. We also have people in our community who, for religious reasons, wear a face covering that covers up most of their face. And so that ordinance, it needs to be updated. It's got to be updated. If it's going to be enforced, there's got to be appropriate exemptions that take into account religious expression, health reasons, and things like that. So we're going to keep listening and try to right-size that ordinance so it's appropriate for the 21st century and doesn't get enforced in a way that's going to target any particular group for bad reasons.
Just one thing to follow up with, it's understandable that we're in a very low trust environment right now, and that is felt by the outcomes in violent crime, that people don't feel that they can participate in the criminal justice system. So just telling us that we're going to train officers, I realize it's not enough, and that there needs to be data that is behind that. And so one of the things that you'll see a lot of is data on how our enforcement activities are going to be addressed, and the community will be able to look at it. They'll be able to provide input about whether or not they think that the tactics and strategies that we're employing are useful in addressing the major issues that we're facing. So it will not be even a trust but verify situation. We're not asking you to trust us yet. We're asking you to watch how it works and provide that input.
And as she said, data, I'll just give you a quick understanding. We don't keep a separate stat for masks, but just a search of reports in violent crime cases. So these are shootings and homicides. There was a description of either the suspect or the victim 123 times wearing a mask. $39 of the rest that we've made for shootings and homicides were suspects that wore a mask. You tell me, is respiratory issues killing young black men, or is it lead poisoning? It's guns. Right? So are we going to make mistakes? 100%. Is it your responsibility to tell us when we're making mistakes? 100%. Is it our responsibility to listen and make adjustments when we make mistakes? 100%. But we are going to put efforts forth to make sure that number doesn't continue to rise.
So I think I've asked most of the questions, and though I may not have asked them verbatim, I believe that combining some of the questions really reached it. But I do have time for one more question, and I can tell it's the same person. And this audience member is concerned about houselessness or policing houselessness and drugs in order to make sure that their environment is safe. And so it's not a question about why aren't you doing this to people who are houseless? It's like, what are you gonna do more for houselessness and drugs in the community?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because there's so much overlap and so much confusion between, we like to label everybody that's houseless in certain ways, and we shouldn't do that. We have to understand that that is a very diverse community as well, with a diverse set of problems. That being said, some of the behaviors that we have that come along with that create issues that we do have to address in a criminal way. But what you'll find is that we have, in our DAP, our Downtown Area Patrol, we have officers that deal with people that are facing houselessness or homelessness on a day-to-day basis. And they work very closely with RCS and Resilience and Community Services, Homeless Services Division. They work very closely with the Homeless Services Division, and their role is, when they don't have to make an arrest, they are there to be a liaison to those resources to get people off the street. I don't have the data in front of me, but the number of recommendations for housing and other resources has been pretty well documented. And if anybody wants it, we can get it to you. It's on their website. But we're also adding 3 more officers to DAP just to deal with that problem. 2 officers and a sergeant, just to be able to help coordinate and deal with the problems that are facing our houseless population. And their role is to primarily offer them resources and connect them with resources and enforce the behaviors that are dangerous or criminal as need be.
Thank you. I'd like to offer you all last comments if you have any. If not, you don't have to, but this is your opportunity.
So I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us tonight. I know it's late. You could have been doing a lot of other things than listening to us. But I think it shows how much you care about this community. I also think it shows that there have been problems in the past, and you recognize that. And the reason that we're here is because we recognize that. And we know that we can do better and that we have to do better. And we as a community must do better, because it's just not on the police department. It's among all of us. We all have to do better. Because if we're going to say that we want crime to go down, then we have to participate in that process. If we don't participate in that process, then it's going to be you saying, I'm okay with the way it is. And I don't think you're okay with the way it is, because that's why you're here. That's why we're here. And so my ask is from everybody is that we find ways that we can work together on the things that we can agree on and move our community forward. Thank you.
I'll just echo what Deputy Mayor James said. Community safety is something that we have to do together, right? We don't have to agree with each other on everything, but if we can respect what we're trying to do, we can agree to disagree and move on, and we can work in partnership on the things that we do, and that's very important. The police are not the sole providers of safety in this community. The community is the primary provider of safety. We are here to supplement that and step into the role where people can't handle it themselves. So I thank you all for your input. I am an open book, like I said. You don't have to like what I say, you don't have to agree with what I say, but trust that I believe in what I say. And so when I tell you that we are going to improve the police department and we are going to do things the right way, that is my promise to you. And then when we don't get it wrong, I'll let you know that or when we don't get it right, I will let you know, and we will take steps to make sure that we get it right the next time.